This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, you walk into your kitchen, and you turn on the tap to make your morning coffee.
Essential start to the day.
Right, totally essential. But nothing comes out.
Just completely dry.
Yeah, you jiggle the handle, you check under the sink to see if a pipe burst or something. You go outside, you check the water main.
And there's just nothing.
Nothing. No leaks, no broken plumbing in your house at all.
Yeah.
And the reality is actually far more unsettling because nothing is coming out of the tap because the entire region's water supply is practically gone.
It's a genuinely terrifying scenario for any community.
It really is.
And it completely strips away this illusion we all kind of walk around with, the illusion that we are insulated from the fundamental realities of our environment. We just expect modern water infrastructure to be this binary, foolproof system.
Right. The tap is either on or it's off.
Exactly.
It's deeply comforting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We just turn the handle, the water flows. It's a marvel of human engineering. It's clean, it's treated. And we never really think about the watershed it actually came from.
Most people don't, no.
But when you look at the massive stack of sources we have for this deep dive today, you realize that the complex system sitting behind that tap is, well, it's incredibly fragile.
We're looking at a landscape of water security that is, quite honestly, in a state of crisis across much of the world right now.
Yeah.
The traditional methods we have used for over a century to secure our water, they're starting to buckle under the weight of a changing climate.
Which brings us to the actual setting of today's deep dive. We're exploring the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, Canada.
A beautiful area.
Oh, absolutely stunning. Now, for those of you listening who haven't been there, the name Sunshine Coast might, evoke images of sandy beaches and palm trees or something.
Or it sounds like California.
Yeah, exactly. But this is actually a lush, rugged, coastal rainforest ecosystem. It's a place defined by giant western red cedars, incredibly dense moss-draped forests, and historically, an absolute abundance of water.
It rains a lot.
It rains so much. Yet, in the late summers of 2022 and 2023, this temperate rainforest hit what is known as a level 5 drought.
Wow.
Yeah. And just for some context for you guys listening, level 5 is the highest, most severe drought classification in the entire province of British Columbia.
Right, and to understand the gravity of that, we really have to look at what a level 5 drought actually means on the ground.
What does it look like for the people living there?
Well, the official provincial definition states that adverse impacts to the ecosystem and the local economy are, quote, almost certain.
Almost certain. That's bleak.
It is. And on the Sunshine Coast, this translated into stage 4 water restrictions for over 20,000 residents in communities like Sechelt and Half Moon Bay.
Okay, so stage 4.
Yeah, stage 4 means we're talking about a complete and total ban on all outdoor water use.
And reading through the regional reports we have here, it went way beyond just, letting your lawn go brown or not washing your car.
Oh, far beyond that. The local government had to take unprecedented steps. They actually issued emergency orders forcing breweries, water bottling plants, and concrete businesses to completely shut down their water use.
Wait, concrete businesses?
Yes. Imagine running a concrete business.
An industry that fundamentally relies on water just to mix its product.
Exactly. And being told you just have to halt operations entirely.
That is wild.
They were forced to shut down because the main reservoir for the region, Chapman Lake, which serves about 90% of the area's residents, was facing what officials called imminent exhaustion.
Imminent exhaustion. In a coastal rainforest. I was reading that and just trying to wrap my head around the paradox.
It's hard to reconcile.
It really is. It's like a bank running out of money, but the bank is literally located inside a gold mine.
That's a great way to put it.
So the mission of this deep dive today is to figure out how on earth does a rainforest run out of water? And more importantly, how do we fix it?
Because we have to fix it.
We do. We've got an incredibly dense stack of sources to go through today. We're looking at hydrological studies, regional 10-year water strategies, ecological restoration manuals from Utah State University, and some really fascinating local field reports.
And the solution we are going to explore is going to sound completely counterintuitive to anyone trained in modern civil engineering or urban planning.
Yeah, I'll give you a hint. We are not talking about building a bigger concrete dam.
No, we are not.
We are going to explore a wildly unconventional, surprisingly messy, and frankly, a very furry solution to this multi-million-dollar infrastructure crisis.
Furry, right?
The answer involves mud, sticks. It's a total paradigm shift in how we view the concept of a healthy river and a 40-pound rodent that has been engineering our landscapes for over 1,000,000 years.
But to truly appreciate the elegance of that natural solution, we first have to unpack the failure of the human ones.
Right. We have to understand the problem first.
Exactly. We need to understand why the traditional, highly engineered infrastructure, what hydrologists call gray infrastructure, why that's failing us so spectacularly.
So let's jump right in and start with the root cause of the crisis. Looking at the climate data in these reports, the baseline of what is considered normal on the Sunshine Coast and really across all of Western North America is shifting dramatically.
It's shifting fast.
We always hear that climate change means things are getting generally warmer, with longer, hotter, and drier summers. But the sources point out that the real crisis is actually happening in the winter.
Yes, the winter dynamics are really the hidden driver of this entire water shortage.
How so?
Well, historically, these coastal mountain ecosystems rely heavily on snowpack.
Okay.
During the winter, precipitation falls in the mountains as snow, and that snow essentially acts as a massive frozen, slow-release savings account for the watershed.
Because it just sits up there frozen until the weather warms up.
Right. And as it slowly melts throughout the spring and into the late summer, it continuously feeds the streams, it keeps the lakes topped up, and it slowly trickles down to recharge the groundwater table.
So it's a perfectly timed delivery system.
Exactly. But with warmer winters, the freezing line in the mountains is moving higher and higher.
Meaning less snow.
Meaning less snow, yes. Precipitation that used to fall as snow is increasingly falling as rain.
And I imagine rain behaves completely differently in a steep mountain watershed than a slow-melting snowpack does.
It creates a fundamentally different hydrological mechanism. Hydrologists refer to this as flashy winter flows.
Flashy flows.
Yeah. When the precipitation falls as rain, it hits the steep mountain ground, rushes rapidly through the river systems, scours the riverbeds, and just flushes straight out into the ocean within a matter of days or even hours.
Wow, so it doesn't stick around at all.
No, it doesn't get deposited into that frozen savings account.
So the water isn't necessarily gone from the climate system overall. It's just arriving at the wrong time, moving way too fast, and leaving before we can actually use it.
Exactly.
So when that long, hot, extended summer finally arrives in July and August, the streams run dry because there is no late-season meltwater left to sustain the ecosystem, or the human communities that rely on it for that matter.
That is the core of the crisis. The total volume of water over the year might be similar, but the storage mechanism, the snowpack, is disappearing.
Which brings us to how we traditionally try to fix this.
The human approach.
Right. When a municipality realizes their natural storage is gone and they are running out of water, the knee-jerk reaction is to build our way out of it using that gray infrastructure you mentioned earlier.
Right. We pour concrete, we lay steel pipes, we install massive diesel pumps.
It is the default setting for modern municipal planning. On the Sunshine Coast, for instance, the regional district has poured significant capital into drilling deeper wells, like the Church Road well field, trying to tap into deeper aquifers.
But the problem there is, when the surface water dries up, the aquifers aren't far behind.
Yeah, they're connected.
Very connected. During the worst of the 2022 and 2023 droughts, they had to resort to incredibly desperate emergency measures.
Like what?
They actually brought in these massive emergency siphon systems on Edwards Lake.
Oh, I was looking at the photos of that operation in the sources. They had to actually fly equipment in, right?
They did. They had helicopters flying in equipment. They were installing large diameter pipes to physically siphon the last bit of accessible water over the natural rim of the lake.
So they're dragging the lake level down below its natural outlet.
Exactly. Just dragging it down to pull enough water into the treatment system to guarantee the community supply until the November rains finally arrive.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It's the very definition of a reactive emergency posture. It's not sustainable.
And if you look at the broader research we pulled, there's an even more extreme example of this gray infrastructure dead end from Dawson Creek.
Right, another city in British Columbia, up in the northeast part of the province.
Dawson Creek provides a very stark contrast and a really profound warning about the limits of human engineering.
They have been facing a historic multi-year drought that is just devastating the region.
Yeah.
Their historical water source, the Kiskatinaw River, has recently seen the lowest flows in its recorded history.
And the sources note it's not for lack of engineering. Over the years, they've built weirs across the river. They constructed a water reclamation facility specifically for industrial use so they wouldn't waste drinking water.
Which is smart.
Very smart. And they even built a massive new raw water reservoir designed to hold 1 million cubic meters of water.
But the sources say it's still not enough.
No. The river is just too low to even fill the new reservoir.
Wow.
So their next proposed solution is staggering.
They are currently in the conceptual stages of considering a new drinking water pipeline to the Peace River.
A pipeline.
A 55-kilometer pipeline across very rugged terrain.
And the cost.
Early conceptual numbers put the cost of that single project in the range of $100 million.
$100 million to pipe water, 55 kilometers.
Yeah.
Looking at this from an outsider's perspective, it really feels like we're trying to fix a leaky bucket by just buying a slightly longer, vastly more expensive hose.
That's exactly what it is.
We keep treating water as a conveyance problem. We ask our engineers, like, how fast can we move water from point A to point B to feed this city? But the reality of climate change is showing us that it's actually a storage problem.
The conveyance mindset is the exact trap we have fallen into. We have spent over a century engineering our landscapes for maximum efficiency in moving water away. We drain wetlands, we straighten rivers, we pave over recharge zones.
Just getting the water out of our way.
Yes. And this multi-million-dollar gray infrastructure approach, like the 55-kilometer pipeline, completely ignores the root cause of the crisis, which is that our landscapes have been structurally starved.
Structurally starved.
They have lost their natural ability to hold onto water, to act like a sponge.
Let's dive deep into that term, structurally starved, because it is the central thesis of the Utah State University Riverscapes design manuals we reviewed.
It's a crucial concept.
If the problem is storage, we need to understand why the landscape has lost its natural sponge. What does it actually mean for a river or a stream to be structurally starved?
Well, to understand that, we have to look back at the last century or two of land management. Humans have actively, systematically, and very intentionally removed the natural mess from our rivers and streams.
The mess.
The mess. Think about a pristine, untouched river corridor. It is chaotic.
Right.
It is full of large woody debris, fallen ancient trees, massive log jams, and incredibly dense in-stream vegetation.
But if you're, say, an early settler or an industrial logger, that chaos is your worst enemy.
Exactly. We cleared all of that out. We pulled the logs out of the rivers to make them navigable for steamboats and barges.
Makes sense at the time.
Sure. We used the rivers as highways to float timber down to the mills, which required dynamiting the log jams.
Oh, wow, dynamiting them.
We straightened the channels to maximize the amount of flat, arable agricultural land in the valley bottoms. And we dredged the rivers for flood control so we could build roads and towns right up to the very edge of the banks.
We basically imposed our human preference for neat, tidy order onto a natural system that evolved to thrive on chaos.
And by doing so, we fundamentally broke the physics of the watershed.
How so?
Those fallen trees, those log jams, the dense root systems, they weren't just random debris. They were critical structural elements.
Okay.
The Utah State University manuals explicitly detail how this structural starvation alters the very velocity and energy of the water moving through the system.
I was actually trying to come up with an analogy for this while reading the physics section of the manual.
Oh, let's hear it.
When you remove all that natural structure, all those log jams and boulders, it's like taking all the speed bumps, stop signs, and curbs out of a neighborhood street. What used to be a meandering, slow country road suddenly turns into a drag strip.
That is a perfect visualization of the hydraulics at play. Yes. Without those structural speed bumps, the energy of the flowing water isn't dissipated against the wood and the banks. It isn't forced to slow down.
So where does the energy go?
Instead, all that kinetic energy is directed straight downward into the stream itself. The water flows faster, and as it does, it scours the bottom. Over time, the stream incises. That's the technical term. It cuts a deep trench into the earth.
And once it cuts that deep trench, the physics of the entire valley change.
They do. The stream becomes physically disconnected from its surrounding floodplain.
Because it's too deep.
Exactly. In a healthy system, when a big spring melt or a heavy rainstorm happens, the water rises, spills over the shallow banks, and spreads out across the flat valley floor.
Right.
But in an incised stream, The banks are now steep, high walls of dirt, maybe 5, 10, or even 20 feet high.
Wow.
Even during massive high-flow events, the water can't spill over. The stream essentially becomes a pipe. It acts like a fire hose, rapidly flushing water out of the watershed.
But the damage goes way beyond just moving water too fast, right? The sources say it actually drains the surrounding landscape.
Yes, and this is the most critical part for our drought discussion. The water table in a valley. The level of groundwater saturated in the soil is directly tied to the elevation of the stream.
Okay, so if the stream drops,
If the stream cuts a trench 10 feet deep into the earth, the surrounding groundwater slowly drains out of the soil and into that trench, lowering the entire water table of the valley by 10 feet.
so the sponge is literally drained from the bottom up.
Exactly.
The landscape dries out, the riparian vegetation dies off because its roots literally can no longer reach the water.
And this brings us to one of the most counterintuitive yet absolutely vital riverscapes principles outlined in the Restoration Manual.
I think I know which one you're going to say.
It is a principle that makes most civil engineers very uncomfortable. Inefficient conveyance of water is healthy.
I read that line 3 times. Inefficient conveyance.
Mm-hmm.
As a modern society, we worship efficiency.
We do.
We want traffic to move efficiently, we want data to move efficiently, and we certainly want our storm drains to move water efficiently.
We do, but nature operates on a different metric. A healthy stream should be highly inefficient. It should struggle to move water quickly.
It should be a traffic jam.
A hydrological traffic jam. The water should be constantly shunted around log jams. It should be forced to back up into deep, sprawling pools, and it should regularly overflow its banks and soak the surrounding valley bottom.
Why is that so important?
Because when a stream is hydraulically inefficient, it forces the water to spread out and sink into the earth. It creates a massive underground reservoir. It fills up that valley bottom sponge.
And the beauty of that underground sponge is that it doesn't evaporate under the hot summer sun.
That's the genius of it. During the spring, the sponge fills up. And then during those long, dry, hot summer months when the rain stops, that stored groundwater slowly, steadily leaks back into the stream from the surrounding soil.
Ah, so it feeds the stream from below.
Yes. It provides a constant base flow, keeping the stream running, keeping the ecosystem alive, and providing a steady supply of water for human communities downstream.
So if we synthesize this, we know exactly what the landscape should look like.
Right.
It should be messy, complex, structurally diverse, and incredibly inefficient. But here is the massive logistical nightmare facing the Sunshine Coast and everywhere else. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of miles of streams across North America that are currently acting like incised drag strips.
A massive scale of degradation.
Yeah, we as a society simply do not have the money, the manpower, or the diesel fuel to manually go out and drop logs, build complex structures, and re-engineer every single degraded stream. It's just too vast a problem.
The scale of the degradation is indeed beyond human capacity to fix manually, which is why the paradigm shift requires us to look for a partner.
A partner.
We have to find a workforce that works for free, never sleeps, and has an innate biological drive to restore hydrological inefficiency.
And this is where we finally meet the original ecosystem engineers. Enter Castor canadensis, the North American beaver.
The beaver.
When you look at the paleontology and the historical ecology in our sources, you realize that for over 1 million years, long before we ever started pouring concrete or laying pipes, beavers have been the keystone species shaping our riverscapes.
They are, without exaggeration, the ultimate managers of hydrological inefficiency.
It's what they do best.
A beaver's entire biological imperative is to slow water down. They need to spread it out and create deep, still ponds.
And why do they need the ponds so badly? It's not just because they like swimming, right?
No, it's survival. Beavers on land are awkward, slow, and highly vulnerable to predators like wolves, bears, and cougars.
Essentially giant waddling snacks on land.
Exactly. But in the water, they are incredibly agile and safe. They build dams to flood the valley bottom so they can build their lodges with underwater entrances.
So the pond is their moat.
It's their moat. It's their safe foraging area. In the process of securing their own survival, they inadvertently build the exact structural complexity and the exact groundwater sponge that our modern landscapes are starving for.
But bringing the beaver back into the conversation introduces a massive cultural and logistical hurdle.
It does.
The sources dive deep into what they call the beaver conflict paradigm. And we need to look at this impartially for a second because the relationship between humans and beavers is incredibly fraught.
It is a deeply complex dynamic. And just to be clear, we are just looking at the source material here, not taking sides. There are very valid concerns on all sides of this issue.
Right.
I have to start with the historical context. The degraded landscapes we see today didn't just happen by accident.
No.
In the 18th and 19th centuries, the global demand for beaver pelts, mostly to make felt hats for European fashion, drove an unprecedented trapping boom. The Hudson's Bay Company and other fur traders effectively extirpated beavers across vast swaths of the North American continent.
They removed millions of them. They essentially removed the water managers before the landscape was even mapped or settled by Westerners.
And that mass removal is the root cause of the initial stream incision. We removed the engineers, the dams rotted away, the structural speed bumps disappeared, and the infrastructure of the rivers collapsed.
But the conflict isn't just historical. Even today, the lethal removal of beavers, trapping and killing them, is standard management practice in many, many municipal and agricultural jurisdictions.
Yes, it is.
And reading the sources, you can't just brush that off as people being anti-nature. There are very real economic reasons for it.
Absolutely. The reasons are entirely pragmatic from a human perspective. Beavers are relentlessly industrious, and they possess zero respect for human property lines, zoning laws, or infrastructure budgets.
They don't care about our roads.
Not at all. A beaver hears the sound of running water through a road culvert, and their instinct tells them it's a hole in a dam that needs plugging.
So they plug it.
They will happily pack that culvert with mud and sticks overnight, and the next day, a multi-million-dollar public roadway is entirely washed out by the flooded pond.
Or think about the agricultural side. The sources point out that if you are a rancher operating on tight margins and a family of beavers moves in and floods 10 acres of your prime grazing pasture.
That is a devastating financial loss.
Yeah.
Or if they start harvesting your prized ornamental trees or valuable timber to build their dams. For a municipal road manager or a private landowner, a beaver is often viewed as a massive, unpredictable liability.
It is a genuine clash of infrastructures. Human infrastructure requires predictability, efficiency, and dry land. Beaver infrastructure requires chaos, inefficiency, and flooded land.
That's a great summary.
But it's a fascinating psychological pivot we're being asked to make by these ecological reports. We spent the last 200 years treating them like a nuisance, specifically because they flooded things.
Right.
And now, staring down the barrel of a level 5 drought, we are suddenly realizing that flooding things, recharging that underground sponge, was the exact mechanism that insulated our ecosystems from running dry in the first place.
The realization is that the nuisance behavior is actually a highly evolved climate resilience service.
Wow.
But even if a community accepts that beaver dams are good for water storage, it raises another critical question, particularly on the Sunshine Coast.
The other wildlife.
What about the other wildlife, specifically the salmon?
Yes, the salmon question. This is a massive, highly debated local concern.
It is.
The Sunshine Coast Salmon Enhancement Society, which operates the Chapman Creek Hatchery, has been very vocal about this dynamic.
Yeah.
And their logic seems straightforward. Salmon need to swim upstream from the ocean to spawn in the rivers.
Right.
If you have a stream full of dense woven beaver dams, doesn't that block the salmon? Are we sacrificing the salmon run to save the municipal water supply?
It's a very intuitive concern, and the science presented in our sources shows a deeply nuanced reality.
Okay, lay it out for us.
We have to remember that the relationship between beavers and salmonids, like the coho and chum salmon, native to the Sunshine Coast, is not new. They have co-evolved in these exact river systems for tens of thousands of years.
So the salmon must have figured out a way past them.
They did. While a large, heavily maintained beaver dam can present a temporary barrier to adult salmon during periods of very low water flow, the broader scientific consensus reveals that beaver complexes actually provide incredibly critical habitat for the salmon life cycle.
Really?
Yes, particularly for the juveniles.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that is. Why does a juvenile salmon need a beaver pond?
Think back to the flashy winter flows we discussed earlier, the rain hitting the steep mountains and rushing out to sea.
A fire hose effect.
Exactly. If a stream is an incised drag strip, a tiny, newly hatched juvenile salmon of frangri has nowhere to hide from that sheer velocity of water.
Oh, they just get swept away.
They simply get washed right out into the salty ocean before their bodies are biologically ready to survive there.
So they need a nursery.
Precisely. A beaver pond provides a calm, deep, highly complex refuge. The water is slower,
And there's probably food there, right?
Tons of it. The decaying wood from the dam breeds massive amounts of macroinvertebrates, bugs, which is the perfect food source for the growing fish.
Oh, wow.
The deep pools also regulate the water temperature, keeping it cool in the summer and preventing it from freezing solid in the winter. The data overwhelmingly shows that juvenile fish populations are larger, healthier, and have higher survival rates in complex beaver-modified streams.
But we still have to address the adult salmon migrating upstream. If the water is low and there's a huge dam, they can't jump it.
Which is why active management, rather than just letting nature run completely wild, is sometimes required in these heavily compromised modern systems.
Active management.
Yeah.
Meaning humans intervene.
Yes. Ecological restoration teams will often practice what is called notching dams.
Notching. How does that work in practice?
It literally means a team goes out during the peak weeks of the adult salmon migration, wades into the stream, and physically pulls a section of sticks and mud out of the top lip of the beaver dam.
Just making a hole.
Basically. This creates a temporary localized spillway. It lowers the barrier just enough to allow the adult salmon to easily pass through and continue upstream to spawn.
And the beavers don't mind.
Whoa! They mind entirely.
I bet.
They will typically repair the notch within a few days once they notice the leak, but by that time, the pulse of migrating salmon has already passed through.
So it's a timing thing.
It's a managed coexistence. We intervene surgically for a few weeks to assist the fish, but we leave the dam intact for the rest of the year to maintain the water storage.
Okay, so the science says beavers are the ultimate answer to storing water, rebuilding the underground sponge, and even helping the juvenile salmon. But here is the massive catch that the ecological restoration manuals point out. You can't just trap a beaver, drive it out to a deeply incised, dry, degraded stream, drop it in like a paratrooper, and expect it to magically fix everything.
No, you absolutely cannot. And this is a mistake early restoration efforts often made.
Oh, really?
Yes. You have to remember the biology of the animal. Beavers are aquatic creatures. On dry land or in a shallow trickle of a stream, they are highly vulnerable.
Like we said earlier, slow and waddling.
Right. If you drop a beaver into a stream that has incised into a 10-foot deep trench, they have no deep water to dive into when a predator approaches.
They're trapped in a ditch.
Exactly. They will either get washed entirely out of the system during the next flashy winter rainstorm because there's nowhere for the water to spread out, or they will be eaten by a cougar or bear within a week.
That's tragic.
They need deep water to survive, but they need to build a dam to create deep water. It's a chicken and egg problem.
So if the beavers can't survive in the broken streams long enough to fix them, humans have to step in and build the starter homes to invite them back.
Yes.
And this brings us to one of the most fascinating and rapidly growing movements we uncovered in the sources, the low-tech process-based restoration revolution, or LTPBR.
LTPBR is a mouthful of an acronym, but it represents a profound shift in ecological restoration.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It is being heavily championed by groups like the BC Wildlife Federation's watershed team, and the core philosophy is a radical departure from everything we've been taught about managing rivers.
Right, because traditional river restoration is a massive, heavy industry undertaking.
It involves diesel excavators, surveying equipment, hauling in tons of precisely graded boulders, and chaining logs to the riverbed to force the river into a specific shape.
It's expensive, rigid engineering.
Exactly.
But the LTPBR approach is literally sticks, mud, and muscle power. They build structures called BDAs, beaver dam analogs.
Beaver dam analogs are exactly what the name implies. Restoration teams go into a degraded, incised stream without any heavy machinery.
No excavators.
None. They use only locally sourced natural materials, mostly willow branches, alder, mud, and turf. Sometimes, to give the structure an initial anchor in a fast-moving stream, they will use hydraulic post pounders to drive untreated wooden posts vertically into the stream bed.
And then they just weave the branches between the posts, right? Like a giant basket.
Yes, they weave the branches, pack the upstream side with mud and rocks from the stream bed, and create a permeable temporary dam.
That's so cool.
It is literal biomimicry. They are mimicking the exact structure and function of a natural beaver dam to immediately slow the water down and start flooding the trench.
The guiding principles behind this methodology, as laid out by the BC Wildlife Federation, are so refreshing. The first principle they highlight is, it's okay to be messy.
Which goes against all the instincts of a classically trained planner or engineer. We want clean lines and permanent structures. But in LTPBR, The goal isn't a perfect, enduring aesthetic form. The goal is to initiate a biological and hydrological process. You want the water to hit this messy pile of sticks, slow down, back up into a pool, and start pushing its way out onto the dry floodplain.
The second principle is strength in numbers.
This is a critical economic and structural shift. Instead of a municipality spending $50,000 or $100,000 to hire contractors to build one massive, over-engineered rock weir that is completely rigid and might entirely blow out during a 100-year flood event.
You take a fraction of that cost. You send a team out to build dozens of small, cheap, permeable, messy BDAs along a mile-long stretch of river.
It provides structural redundancy.
Exactly. If a massive storm washes 3 of them away, it doesn't matter because the other 20 absorb and dissipate the hydrologic energy. The system flexes rather than breaking.
And the third principle, which might be my favorite, let the system do the work.
This is the ultimate humility in restoration, isn't it?
It really is. We don't need human engineers with laser levels to perfectly grade a floodplain. We don't need dump trucks to manually haul in hundreds of tons of sorted spawning gravel for the salmon.
Water is incredibly powerful.
Water is doing the work. We just provide the obstacles, the BDAs. The river's own hydrologic energy will hit those obstacles, swirl around, scour out deep pools, sort the gravel naturally, deposit sediment on the banks, and rebuild its own stream. We just provide the nudge.
I have to play the role of the skeptical city planner here, though.
Go for it.
I'm looking at this from the perspective of an infrastructure manager facing a level 5 drought on the Sunshine Coast. You're telling me that the solution to a multi-million-dollar municipal water crisis, the answer to businesses shutting down and taps running dry, is a bunch of volunteers in waders weaving willow branches into the mud.
I know.
It sounds like an arts and crafts project.
Yeah.
Do we actually have empirical landscape-scale proof that this low-tech approach works?
It's the most common and necessary pushback this movement faces. It sounds quaint. It sounds too simple to solve complex modern crises.
It really does.
But to answer your question, we have to look outside the coastal rainforest for a moment. We need to look at the exceptional models across Western North America where this exact stick-and-mud methodology has been rigorously scientifically tested over decades.
Okay, let's see the data.
The data is not just suggestive, it is absolutely staggering.
Let's start with Model 1, which the sources highlight as the ultimate fish myth buster. This takes us to Bridge Creek, Oregon.
Bridge Creek is a landmark watershed-scale experiment that fundamentally validated the use of BDAs.
What was the situation there?
The stream there was deeply incised, the water was moving too fast, and crucially, it was designated as critical habitat for an Endangered Species Act-listed population of steelhead trout.
Okay, so highly protected.
Very. The traditional regulatory thinking was that building any kind of dam would block the endangered fish and harm the population.
But the researchers got permission to test the theory anyway. They went in and installed 120 beaver dam analogs across the watershed to try and reconnect the stream to its floodplain.
They did, and they rigorously monitored the fish populations before, during, and after the installation.
And the result?
The ecological response was explosive.
I'm looking at the data points here in the paper, and it completely flips the traditional engineering script.
The researchers documented a 168% increase in juvenile steelhead abundance.
Wow.
They saw a 52% increase in the survival rate of those juveniles.
That is massive.
And an astonishing 172% increase in overall fish production in the watershed.
Because they built the nurseries. They created the deep, cool pools and generated the insect life the fry needed to survive the flashy flows.
Exactly.
It unequivocally proved that adding structural complexity, even if it looks like a barrier, doesn't harm fish. It supercharges their ecosystem.
It was a watershed moment, pun intended, for fisheries biology.
Okay, so we've proven we can save the fish. But the Sunshine Coast isn't just worried about fish, they're worried about their taps running dry.
That's right.
If we want proof that sticks and mud can actually conjure water out of nowhere and create that underground sponge, we shouldn't look at a rainy coast. We need to look at a desert.
Right.
Which brings us to Model 2. Maggie Creek, Nevada. Let's call this the drought buster.
Maggie Creek is one of the most visually profound and scientifically compelling examples in all of the hydrological literature.
Nevada is high desert.
It is an incredibly arid, unforgiving environment. Historically, decades of heavy overgrazing had stripped the valley of its riparian vegetation.
So no roots holding the soil.
Right. Without the roots holding the banks, The stream incised into a deep trench, and the native beavers completely abandoned the area. It was just a dusty, dry ditch.
But over the last 2 decades, the land managers initiated a change.
They didn't even bring in heavy machinery. They simply changed the grazing management.
Really? Just grazing?
Yes. They worked with ranchers to rest the valley bottom during certain times of the year, allowing the native willows and vegetation a chance to grow back along the banks.
And here's the magic. When the building materials grew back, the original engineers returned.
The beavers came back on their own, and with abundant willows to eat and build with, they went to work.
Nature taking its course.
Over a few years, they built massive, highly complex, cascading networks of dams across the entire valley, and researchers tracked the impact of this using satellite imagery over 20 years.
They were measuring something called NDVI, right? Let's explain how that works mechanically.
NDVI stands for Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. Essentially, satellites measure the amount of near-infrared light bouncing off the Earth.
Okay.
Healthy, water-rich plant cells reflect a lot of near-infrared light, while dry, dead plants absorb it. So NDVI is a highly accurate quantitative measure of the greenness or biological productivity of a landscape.
And the data from Maggie Creek over those 20 years reveals something that honestly sounds like magic. The sources state that the vegetation productivity in that valley bottom became completely decoupled from precipitation.
Think about the mechanics of what that actually means. Normally, in a high desert ecosystem, there is a direct one-to-one relationship. If it rains a lot that year, the valley turns green.
And if it doesn't?
If there's a severe drought that year, everything turns brown and dies. It's totally dependent on the sky.
Right.
But at Maggie Creek, because the beaver complexes had slowed the water down and pushed so much of it out into the porous soil, creating a massive underground reservoir, the valley stayed lush, vibrant, and incredibly green even during severe multi-year drought periods.
The savings account analogy realized perfectly. The sponge absorbed the excess water during the rare wet years and slowly doled it out to the plant roots in the stream during the dry years.
Exactly.
It literally insulated the entire landscape from the volatility of climate change.
It is the ultimate proof of concept for resilience.
And that brings us to Model 3, which might be the most dramatic and visceral example of all. Bow Creek, Idaho. Let's call this the fire break.
In the western United States and across western Canada, prolonged drought and catastrophic wildfire are inextricably linked.
We see it on the news every summer.
As the landscape dries out, it becomes a tinderbox. At Bow Creek, a massive, incredibly intense 65,000-acre wildfire swept through the landscape.
65,000 acres.
The fire was driven by high winds and burned so hot it scorched the riparian areas right down to the mineral ash. It destroyed almost everything in its path.
Almost everything.
Yes, except for one specific continuous stretch of the stream valley. That specific area was actively inhabited and maintained by beaver dam complexes.
I am looking at the aerial drone photos from the source material right now, and it is genuinely mind-blowing.
It's a stark contrast.
The entire surrounding landscape, the hills, the distant valleys, is a blackened, charred moonscape. But winding right through the middle of it is this bright, vibrant, emerald green ribbon. It looks photoshopped.
It is entirely real, and it comes down to basic thermodynamics. Water absorbs a massive amount of heat energy before it evaporates.
Okay.
Because the beavers had pushed the water out across the floodplain, saturating the soil and creating lush, waterlogged vegetation, the fire simply could not generate enough heat to dry the area out and burn it.
It acted as an actual physical fire break. The fire hit the wet zone and stopped.
And the ecological value of that extends far beyond just stopping the flames.
No.
During the fire, and in the critical weeks afterward when the surrounding landscape was reduced to ash, that green beaver complex provided vital refugia.
A safe haven.
It was a safe haven, a surviving oasis of food and shelter for wildlife, birds, and even local livestock that would have otherwise perished.
Okay, I want to take a moment to synthesize this, because looking at these three models together is a massive aha moment.
It really...
By simply restoring a stream's structural complexity with sticks and mud, or by giving the beavers the habitat they need to do it for us, we inadvertently create a silver bullet for our three biggest, most terrifying climate threats: drought, biodiversity loss, and catastrophic wildfire.
It is exceedingly rare in the field of ecology to find a single low-tech intervention that yields such a cascading, systemic array of benefits.
That's kind of beautiful.
It is, but that is the inherent power of working with the natural processes of a landscape rather than constantly trying to engineer against them.
So armed with this proven, staggering science from the fish in Oregon, the deserts of Nevada, and the fires in Idaho, let's bring it back home to our concrete problem on the Sunshine Coast.
Right.
They are staring down level 5 droughts. How are they adapting this stick-and-mud model to save their communities?
We are seeing a massive fundamental shift in strategy happening right now at the municipal level. The Sunshine Coast Regional District is currently finalizing their 10-year water strategy, which runs from 2025 to 2035.
Okay, so looking ahead.
And for the first time in their planning history, instead of just focusing exclusively on the highly vulnerable Chapman Lake Reservoir or drilling more deep wells, they are officially looking at integrating nature-based solutions into their infrastructure grid.
And let's talk about the pure economics of this, because it is brilliant municipal management.
It makes so much sense.
We talked earlier about the emergency siphons on Edwards Lake.
Okay.
Currently, the regional district spends between $300,000 and $500,000 on those reactive emergency measures. Renting the massive pumps, helicoptering equipment in, navigating the emergency environmental waivers, dealing with the crisis logistics.
It is entirely disaster management spending. It fixes absolutely nothing for the following year.
Right. But under the new strategy, they are considering reallocating those exact funds. They want to take that $500,000 and invest it in a long-term, low-tech, process-based restoration.
A proactive approach.
They are proposing using that money for local workforce training and the installation of BDA complexes in the mid-reaches of Chapman and Gray Creeks, the very watersheds that feed their system.
This represents a profound structural shift from a reactive posture to a proactive resilience-building posture.
Let's look at the hydrology of that.
Sure. If you build BDAs in the mid-reaches of those creeks, halfway up the mountain, you fundamentally increase the residence time of the water in the watershed.
You're putting the speed bumps back in.
Exactly. You slow down the rapid runoff from the high-elevation lakes. You force that water to spread out and store itself in the riparian sponge of the valley.
Which acts like a buffer.
Yes. By keeping the water high up in the watershed for weeks or months longer, you significantly reduce the dependency on those artificial emergency siphons later in the dry summer.
And importantly, the regional district isn't doing this in a vacuum. The sources highlight a truly vital foundational partnership with the Seychelles Nation.
Absolutely. The integration of traditional ecological knowledge, or tech, is absolutely central to the success of this effort on the Sunshine Coast.
Grounded in the 2005 Joint Watershed Management Agreement.
Right. Yes. Grounded in that agreement, the regional district and the Seychelles Nation are collaborating on a level that brings thousands of years of observational science directly to the planning table.
I want to explore how tech is practically applied here because it's fascinating. The nation is using their deep historical knowledge to identify historical beaver habitats, the specific valleys and streams where the beavers thrived long before they were trapped out by the fur trade.
It's an incredibly precise mapping tool. Traditional ecological knowledge isn't just folklore. It is generations of empirical observation regarding where the water pooled, where the specific willow species grew thickest, and how the animal populations moved.
It's data.
It is deeply layered data. By utilizing this knowledge, the nation guides the modern restoration teams to the exact topographical sites that have the highest potential for groundwater recharge. They know exactly where the sponge used to be.
It's highly targeted restoration. And they are also focusing heavily on intergenerational stewardship.
Which is key for long-term success.
Through local programs like Talking Trees, which is an ethnobotany initiative, they are taking local youth out into these watersheds. They're connecting them directly to this natural infrastructure, teaching them the medicinal, cultural, and technological uses of the very plants, like the willow, alder, and cedar, that the beavers rely on to maintain the system.
It builds a culture of stewardship that will outlast any 10-year municipal strategy.
It really does.
And to add to that, the nation and the local government are co-leading a massive infrastructure project that sounds like the perfect marriage of gray and green infrastructure.
Oh, tell me about that.
They are currently converting a decommissioned gravel mine pit on Sichel Band lands into a large-scale engineered water storage reservoir.
But the twist is how they are managing the water flowing into it.
Right.
Instead of just building a giant concrete bowl and a multi-million-dollar filtration plant to deal with the silt, they are using upstream beaver dam analogs in the creeks feeding the pit.
It's so smart.
The BDAs slow the water down, allowing the suspended sediment to naturally drop out and settle in the beaver ponds before the clean water ever reaches the reservoir.
It is biofiltration at a landscape scale. It perfectly highlights that the future isn't an either-or scenario. It's not just beavers or just concrete pipes. It's about utilizing biogenic, natural infrastructure to protect, enhance, and extend the lifespan of human infrastructure.
Okay, but we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the beaver in the culvert.
The nuisance beavers.
Right. What about the nuisance beavers, the ones actively flooding the roads today on the Sunshine Coast? If the region is embracing them, does that mean they just let the roads wash out?
No, and this is where the management strategy makes a brilliant shift toward coexistence over conflict.
Coexistent.
Yes, in places on the Sunshine Coast like Flume Creek, where active beaver dams are threatening real, vital road infrastructure, they are fundamentally changing their
What
tactics.
do they used to do?
Historically, a municipal crew would bring in heavy machinery to repeatedly tear the dam down, which, by the way, is an exercise in futility because a motivated beaver will usually rebuild a breached dam within 48 hours.
It's an endless war of attrition, and the beaver doesn't charge overtime.
Exactly.
So what are they doing instead?
They are installing devices known as pond levelers or culvert guards.
Let's explain the mechanics of a pond leveler, because it relies on a really fascinating quirk of beaver biology. It's essentially a hidden pipe inserted right through the middle of the beaver dam, right?
Yes, you take a long, flexible, corrugated plastic pipe. You notch a small hole in the beaver dam, lay the pipe through it, and cover it back up with mud and sticks.
Simple enough.
The downstream end of the pipe lets water flow out, but the genius is on the upstream end, inside the pond.
Right, because if a beaver hears a leak, it plugs it. That's their biological trigger. The sound and the physical sensation of flowing water drives them crazy.
Exactly. So you take the upstream end of the pipe and you submerge it deep underwater in the middle of the pond, often protected by a wire cage so they can't swim right up to it.
Oh, that's clever.
Because the intake is deep underwater, it doesn't create the sound of a rushing leak, and it doesn't create a noticeable surface current.
The beaver doesn't hear a leak, it doesn't feel a leak, so its biological trigger isn't activated. It just thinks the pond has naturally stopped filling up.
Precisely. The hidden pipe acts as an overflow valve that regulates the maximum height of the pond. The pond stays exactly at the height human engineers need it to be to prevent the nearby road from flooding, but the deep water remains.
It is an incredibly elegant compromise. The beavers get to keep their deep water habitat and continue the work of storing water in the soil, and the human infrastructure is completely protected from flooding.
So, looking at all of this, the BDAs, the pond levelers, the tech mapping, what does this all mean for the listener? What is the ultimate long-term goal for the Sunshine Coast?
The ultimate goal, as explicitly outlined in their planning documents, is to structurally shift the region from a perpetual anxiety-ridden state of imminent exhaustion to a resilient state of ecological abundance.
A huge paradigm shift.
By finally moving away from the illusion that we can perfectly control and expedite water through rigid efficiency, and instead embracing the messy, slow, complex reality of natural systems, they are attempting to turn their watersheds back into self-regulating reservoirs.
The aim is to secure a stable water supply for the next 50 years, not just panic manage the next drought cycle.
Okay, let's recap this journey because we've covered a staggering amount of ground in science today.
We really have.
We started with the terrifying, very real scenario of waking up to dry taps, level 5 droughts ravaging a rainforest, and the absolute financial and physical limitations of relying solely on gray, concrete infrastructure.
We saw how traditional river clearing turns our watersheds into incised drag strips that flush our precious water straight out to sea.
And then we explored the alternative. The elegant, beautifully messy, stick-and-mud brilliance of beaver dam analogs, and the necessary return of the ultimate ecosystem engineer, the beaver.
We looked at the hard empirical data from Oregon, Nevada, and Idaho, proving that this low-tech approach doesn't just save the salmon, it fundamentally insulates entire landscapes from drought and literally stops 65,000-acre wildfires in their tracks.
And finally, we saw how the Sunshine Coast is actively rewriting its municipal water strategy to utilize this ancient technology, blending traditional ecological knowledge with modern hydrology to build a resilient future.
The essential takeaway here, the true so what for you listening, whether you happen to live in a lush coastal rainforest, a high desert, or a sprawling urban center, is that water is the foundation of life, and slowing it down is the universal key to climate resilience.
Yes, slowing it down.
We have spent over a century engineering our world to move water out of our way as quickly as possible. The future of our survival and the security of our communities depends entirely on figuring out how to keep that water on the landscape for as long as possible.
Is a profound shift in perspective. So I want to leave you with a final thought today. Next time you are walking in the woods or even just crossing a small creek in your local neighborhood and you look down and see a stream that looks totally choked with fallen logs, tangled branches, and mud.
Don't look at it and think it needs to be cleaned up or fixed.
No. Think of it as a highly advanced, million-year-old piece of climate resilience technology silently doing its job. It begs a really important question for all of us. As we face down the most high-tech, complex, and terrifying climate challenges of our century, what other simple, messy, ancient systems are just out there, waiting for us to finally get out of the way and let them work? Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.